The year is 1385 in the Iberian Peninsula, and as always it is time to invade Portugal. It was becoming almost an obligation at this point. After the failed siege of Lisbon both by land and sea, Castile retreated back across the border into their land. Looking at this from John of Castile's perspective, it seems as if all the previous invasions were tests to measure Portugal's strength, which they passed with distinction. He understood that conquering this country would be a matter of numbers and exhaust, and weaken the Portuguese army bit by bit. So devises a plan for that end. He sends a letter to the King Charles VI of France asking for military support on his invasion of Portugal, which France abides with worry. As Portugal was becoming really intimate with their rival England, and being Portugal located next to their ally Castile, and possibly opening a western front in Iberia against France would be a huge problem. Most importantly, Portugal had a very strong and efficient fleet, which would become the best in the next century. So King Charles VI confided in King Juan of Castile that when the victory was won, he must take hold of the Portuguese fleet to break the English fleet in the English Channel and then invade the country by land. King Juan humbly agrees. As long as he gets Portugal for himself, he gets his dream of a united Christian Iberia. Therefore, in June of 1385, John of Castile decided to invade Portugal once more, this time with a much larger force aided by a contingent of French knights. When the news of the invasion arrived, a war council was made to decide what to do. Some of them thought the invaded army was far too strong to be dealt with by themselves, so they advised that the king should create a diversion by sending an army to Seville to force Castile to march out of Portugal to meet them in Seville, in order to give the English more time to arrive to aid the Portuguese army. But one and only General Nuno Alves Pereira declined and said that this invading army had to be met on the way in the battlefield of their choice, as Lisbon was too weak to resist another siege like last year. Even the king, John of Avis, seemed to agree with Nuno, but didn't give his answer right away. Nuno was becoming impatient, so he set march hoping to encounter the enemy before they got too close to the capital. The king sent a letter demanding their retreat as nothing was decided yet. But Nuno refused and sent back another letter telling the king that he'll meet him there in the battlefield. The English arrive at the site chosen by Nuno, bringing with them 600 longbowmen, and the Anglo-Portuguese army awaits the arrival of Castile. Days later, they arrive in Aljubarrota and notice a Portuguese army very well positioned on top of a hill surrounded by two rivers to avoid being flanked. And probably unknown to Castile, the ground was filled with booby traps to disorder and damage their army before they even reach the enemy. So Castile decides to go around and meet them on the other side where the hill is not so steep. But Castilian army was too large, and takes them half a day to move the entire army to the other side, and by the time they reach it together, the Portuguese already had repositioned and made new booby traps for Castile. The Portuguese army was positioned in the center with a few reserves in the back and English longbowmen on the sides to assist the infantry line. It begins with a heavy cavalry charge by the French knights. As they got closer, the terrain narrowed much more, making them cluster onto each other and bringing disorder to the charge. And to make things even worse, they didn't notice the traps on the ground hidden with branches, and many horses broke their legs in pits, throwing their riders off to the ground, making them easy targets for the English bows. King John of Castile, upon seeing this disaster, orders all of his Castilian army to charge forward to end the battle once and for all. King John of Aviz, upon seeing the attempt of an overall charge, calls the English bowmen back and sends the reserves forward to extend the line and avoid being outflanked. The battle was going hard for a good time, when suddenly everything changed. The flag of King John of Castile fell, and the rest of the army, upon noticing this, retreated back thinking their king was dead. But he was not dead. Only the person that was carrying the flag died, causing a mass retreat on the Castilian side, giving the victory to the Portuguese, which pursued them all day. There is a story of a baker woman called Brits de Almeida, who found 7 Castilian soldiers hidden in her oven and cooked them alive, showing the hatred the population had against Castile. This battle was probably the most important in Portuguese history and the most humiliating for Castile, as on the Portuguese side around 7,000 men fought and only 600 of them died, while Castile brought 30,000 men, leaving behind 5,000 of them. Later on, King John of Aviz built a monument in the area called Monastery of Batalha, which means battle. This battle changed the history of Portugal, and this had tremendous consequences for the world. Castile decreed mourning for 2 years for the fallen in Aljubarrota, making the end of the war, affirming the Portuguese and defining the Portuguese borders and paving the way for a future global empire with Castile to the east. The south was the only way for Portugal to the heights of glory. Thanks for watching. If you want to see more videos, please subscribe, leave a like and click here to watch a previous one.